Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are jumping right back into it. So this session is called PCCAT, the National Transfer System and Beyond. Around the world, the movement of digital credentials and documents has become a priority, particularly in an environment where geography is no longer a barrier to access. In Canada, each province is moving forward with digital processes to remove barriers to student mobility. And as we move forward, the question is, how can we ensure that what happens within our provincial boundaries continues to benefit all students across Canada? So this session is going to provide an overview of some of the current activities that are going on across Canada. So with that, I would like to welcome PCCAT's Executive Director, Rob Fleming, who is going to be leading this panel. Just as a reminder, this session will lead us into our closing comments, which will take place at 3 p.m. You will want to tune in for the closing wrap, as we will be announcing our contest winners, as well as providing some final comments and reflection on this year's gem. Take it away, Rob.
Welcome, everyone, to the final session of PCCAT's JAM 2021. I hope you found the sessions useful and enjoyable over the past couple of days. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Rob Fleming, and it is my pleasure to serve as the Executive Director and Co-Chair of PCCAT. The purpose of this session, entitled The National Transfer System and Beyond, is to provide an update on collaborations among provinces and organizations across Canada in support of more seamless credit mobility and credential recognition for learners. Our speakers will be Anne-Marie Lysing, lead for the ACAT Secretariat in Alberta, Yvette Monroe, Executive Director for ONCAT in Ontario, and Christine Johns, Senior Director, Program Innovation and Planning at the University of Calgary, who is also the chair of the Pan-Canadian Consortium on Admissions and Transfer. Each will focus on key collaborations and activities in their jurisdictions. We will reserve time at the end of the prepared comments for general Q&A and thoughts you may like to contribute on the importance of interprovincial collaborations, especially given circumstances arising from the pandemic, and also on necessary steps to build a more interconnected national system of transfer. Before I hand the virtual mic over to my colleagues, I'd like to provide a brief overview of the credit transfer environment in Canada from an organizational perspective. Please advance the slide, Mike. There are 7 province-based credit transfer organizations, each somewhat unique in keeping with their local post-secondary context and governance, but all focus on facilitating mobility, understanding that learners and workers across provincial and national jurisdictions, in pursuing their personal and career goals. These provincial organizations have MOUs among themselves and with national organizations, including PCCAT and the Association of Registrars of Universities and Colleges in Canada. In addition to leveraging resources and sharing good practices on a regular basis through activities such as conferences and working groups like technology and research, these bodies have collaborated on interprovincial mobility research studies, the development of the online transcript and transfer guide, and supporting the development of the Uruk National Network and MyCredits.ca digital document exchange service. Having provided some context, I'll turn it over to my colleagues to expand on some of the exciting collaborations in process. Anne-Marie will start us off.
Thank you, Rob. It's great to be here, folks, and to have some good discussion today about collaboration. And it's such a core function of how the system works and how we are able to help support increased learner mobility and movement, not just within our jurisdictions, but also across the country and beyond. And with that, I think a few key examples are helpful in this regard, but certainly there'll be more time to talk about it further at the end as well. A few of those examples from an Alberta and collaboration perspective include for us some collaboration certainly with our Saskatchewan neighbors and doing some onboarding related to their membership in the Alberta transfer system. And with that, they have framed a recommendation for the STC LPC in Saskatchewan, their council, for institution members there to apply for Alberta transfer system membership and become members of the system here, really helping to share data. I mean, that's the goal. All of the collaborative pieces here, the more information that students have to be able to then see how that mobility can be supported is a core goal we all share. And some of the other examples will also, I think, illustrate that interoperability, which is a greater goal. Several years from now, we hope to not have the need to say it's our system or your system, it's the system. But I realize I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here for some of the next items. The Saskatchewan piece too We've completed some initial meetings, and there's an intent for next steps over the coming weeks and over the next 1 to 2 years as institutions make those decisions, and we really help them along on that journey for data sharing. I think that's going to ultimately, again, benefit students and benefit the institutions in having shared systems. And previous to that, we'd certainly collaborated with PCCAT, and your TCS here collaborated with ONCAT and other jurisdictions to say, what are the common data elements? Because regardless, we need to be able to know that when we do some data sharing, which is one of the other examples here that we do certainly with PCCAT as well, it's important that we know that we can do that we've already set ourselves up for that success. And again, that broader goal going forward. I think too, that leads to a joint BC Alberta, if you will, connection between your TCS and our LPS, the Learner Pathway System in Alberta, and connecting what we refer to as the operational contact persons and the contact persons here that you have in BC with the TCS, and to be able to information share, collaborate, discuss, problem solve common issues, other future collaboration. There's a really great recommendation from our folks at our recent annual meeting, and we understand that it's going to be, I think, really a rich collaboration that we hope to start in February 2022, but we'll set up that date with PCCAT, and I think that can help us to do a lot of common things that we share, and also especially to problem solve. And we have people, institutions in both systems, of course, and that's, again, part of that greater goal. And I think some of those CATCAN, the national operational folks that collaborate with all of the councils on admissions and transfer, that we have collaborative initiatives that operationally we can see connections, especially around data, data sharing, some of those system interoperability goals that we can see as a target. Our Learner Pathway System in Alberta, some of that collaboration that we already referenced here related to technology and data sharing, some of those common core data elements, and also some of the similar systems, technology, and tools that we problem solved as we each learn things on this journey as we go. For example, we had some really great problem solving related to reciprocity and triangulation of data, and shared that with PCCAT, and they've had some great success with course outline and some of the movement forward there, and some of the challenges that we're trying to address. Certainly we could get into more depth there, but I think the key is that we want to continue to grow that collaboration, because that's the key to us all succeeding within both budget and success as far as the learner. I think too, some of the COVID initiatives, wow, we've all been feeling that one over the last couple of years without question. And we did a great deal of common, especially ourselves in BC and Ontario, common COVID data collection, sharing, especially around delivery, grading, admissions, transfer, and having common links up on our sites today from each other's systems that you can go to and see, here's all the institutions. And that is incredibly helpful, hopefully not to be needed in the near future, but it's a good example of how mobilizing that mobility, if you will, for the learner is so important. And also with the search tool that we have, Transfer Alberta search tool, and some of the mass upload of data sharing and some of those other challenges, and that goal of moving towards a common API or interface to be able to share information even more easily from institutions, that's a goal that we share with PCCAT, and certainly have been working on that one collaboratively as well. And I think too, some of our articulation pieces that some of you I think also would appreciate related to non-members data, and that institution members who have transfer decisions with others can share. And I know that's also a factor in BC's system as well. And PTAC, as we affectionately call it, our Provincial Transitions Articulation Committee, and seeing the provincial transition equivalencies for high school equivalents across the country, with Alberta, with BC, with Ontario, with Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, etc. That analysis having been done by subject matter experts at the institution and shared on Transfer Alberta search tool openly, that is a tool that can be used across the country, is a really good collaborative example. And I think to kind of bring these pieces to a close, just a couple more points about transfer credit awarded, and that provincial data collection is something that PCCAT also collaborated with us a lot to help inform data collection. The first one will happen in Alberta in 2022-23. The PCCAT's been doing that for a number of years, and to know that we have commonality around some of those, again, data elements, really going to help us to look at some things cross-boundary going forward. And I think the articulation committee collaboration that already exists with some committees is excellent, and being able to do even more of that going forward, and maybe having discussions just like this and sessions like this with some of those committees between Alberta, BC, Ontario, and others would be a really rich way to connect, just like the example we talked about with the contact persons. And I guess that just swings us back to the overall point about cross-jurisdictional data sharing. And again, some of the offering sharing that we've done between the TCS in BC and the LPS in Alberta. But continuing to talk with amazing things like Yvette's going to talk about in a moment about MyCredits, and many of us are very familiar with that. Those larger interoperability goals, again, and the national transfer system connections, if you will, we're not quite there yet. But all these things show that there's certainly a lot of movement towards that, and supporting that larger PCCAT MOU that we're very proud to support. And as Vice Chair of PCCAT, I'm just honored to be a part of all this discussion today as well from that point of view. And thank you very much for all of that. And I pass that over to my colleague, Yvette.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and very pleased to join everybody here today. I'm Yvette Monroe with the Ontario Council on Articulation and Transfer. I'm going to highlight a couple of key collaborations that we're really proud of, and obviously focus on the digital element of it. And so the first one is, with ONCAT, in its 10th year, and although we're not quite as old and have not been around quite as long as PCCAT and ACAT, it's nevertheless a really significant milestone for our organization. And when I look back to where ONCAT was when we were created in 2011, there was a public commitment by the government at the time to develop what was to be a one-stop provincial portal to serve the needs of prospective and current transfer students, and provide that information about transfer pathways initially, and then expand that capacity to include information around course-to-course equivalencies. Those of you that are familiar with the portal in Ontario will know it as ontransfer.ca. And then when I jump ahead to where we are 10 years today, it's a wonderful portal, but we call it sort of version 1.1, 1.0, or maybe 2.0. It does provide our prospective transfer students information in a public fashion, but quite honestly, we've outgrown it. It doesn't have the features that we wanted, both in terms of the scale of what we wanted to do with institutions, and it's got some redundancies and some delays in providing information in a real-time format. So we are very proud that over the last year and a half, although I think with COVID, some of the things were delayed a little bit, we were able to look at various options that existed, including looking at the option of, do we want to create something that's standalone for Ontario specifically? Do we want to use a tool that might be, offered south of the border? But when we looked at some of the systems that were already established, we found the system that PCCAT and Campus Manitoba have been using. The TCS was particularly useful. We're particularly interested in the ways that the information provides a little bit more of a real-time course-to-course equivalencies that we could use. We are very attracted to the ability to link into other systems, as Anne-Marie highlighted. It'd be very nice down the road to not just talk about one system, one system in Ontario, but to talk about the system at a national level. And so we were very attracted to the additional features that the PCCAT TCS had, and very pleased that the Ministry of Colleges and Universities, our funder in Ontario, was equally committed to our revamp and overhaul of our current transfer credit assessment tool and portal, and provided us with the funding that we needed in order to embark on this exercise. And so we're in very much the early stages in this collaboration. We're still sort of in discussion and discovery mode, but down the road, we do see a vision where we do have that kind of interoperability, as Anne-Marie talked about, between provinces. It's particularly important, I think, for us in Ontario, because we recognize that given the number of institutions in Ontario, we have over 50 that are publicly funded alone, and that includes the colleges, universities, and Indigenous institutes. There's both a lot of interprovincial transfer coming into Ontario, but also our students in Ontario are going elsewhere. So it is really helpful and important to be able to work with our partners around that and give us a better sense of what's happening nationally. if we want to just jump to the next slide, I'll touch on a really important undertaking that we've embarked on also in Ontario, and that is the adoption and the onboarding to the ARUC MyCredits tool. We have been following this. I want to say I've been with ONCAT for 4 years, and we've been following it, essentially over the last 4 years. And those of you that follow ONCAT on social media may have noticed that we made a significant announcement just days ago, actually, or this past week, where we made a substantial investment into MyCredits. And for those of you who are not familiar with MyCredits, there's just a couple of slides, this slide and the next slide that we'll jump to in a minute, that really touches on what this is. This is essentially a digital credential wallet that allows for the digital exchange of documents, particularly transcript information, is particularly helpful in our context. We know that transfer credit admissions and transfer credit assessment often begins with having a transcript. And we also know, at least in Ontario, that the burden of that process still rests very much so on students, unfortunately. So students have to upload information. They have to make sure that the transcript, that they get their transcript sent. Then along with that, they have to submit additional information, whether it's course outlines in order to be able to facilitate course-to-course equivalency or transfer assessment. Our institutional partners are still, we saw this with COVID. Many of them, depending on where they are in terms of their own digital capacity, we're still primarily paper-based. Some of them obviously very manual and relying on mailed-in information. And we saw, for instance, the challenge around efficient and timely transfer credit admission and assessment when documents are not coming in fully complete, so there's missing information, or not in the format that is easily usable for the institution receiving them. So the MyCredits tool really transforms that. We saw a great potential in this, and I'll just jump ahead to the next slide. I invite everybody to take a look why this is important. And we saw this really as essentially a kind of a win-win-win. First and foremost, it's an absolute win for learners. It puts their credentials, the courses they've done, their credential in their hands. They are able to access that 24/7. And really for us, it really eases the transfer experience. It reduces significantly the burden that is on students and the stress for them to be able to track down documents and arrange for them to be sent. For our institutional partners, you can see on the slide, it provides a lot of information, a lot of tools that make their work much more efficient. And our hope is that it also makes the decision around transfer admissions much more efficient. And we have a very strong commitment in terms of in Ontario, given the number of institutions that we have, to really improve the transfer admission process for every student, regardless of what institution they're attending. And then, of course, in Ontario, given the investment that the Ontario government has made over the past 10 years and plus around transfer, and given the maturation of the transfer system in Ontario, it really it makes good sense for us to look at this tool and align that with the kind of work that we're doing around a revamp of ontransfer.ca, and look at ways to improve the ability for institutions to do this work, both at a system level, but also across diverse institutions. As I said earlier, we have institutions that are large and small, urban and non-urban, some that are using various student information system tools, some that have very large number of transfer applications, and some that are that have more modest amounts. So we're very pleased about that. I'll highlight specifically what we are doing around our investment in MyCredits. We were particularly concerned in Ontario, while we are very pleased to see that a number of Ontario institutions were some of the first to be able to pilot and work with MyCredits. We were a little bit concerned that there could be a widening digital gap or digital divide, particularly between institutions that just didn't have whether it was the IT or the human financial resource capacity to be able to take this on, and not to mention during the time of the pandemic. And so while we saw a number of, I would say, probably larger and probably more urban universities and colleges move to onboarding to MyCredits, we had heard from a number of our partners institutions that they didn't have the capacity or the bandwidth to do that. And so our investment, which is $500,000, it's not a modest amount, it's $500,000 that will go directly to support the ARUC team working on MyCredits to build that infrastructure in order to expand MyCredits adoption in Ontario, but also for them to work in a cohort model, which is a model we've used very successfully in Ontario. My colleagues across the province always ask me, how is it that we're able to work with 50 plus publicly funded institutions? And part of the secret of that is that we often work in a phased and cohort model approach. And so our goal in this investment is to bring anywhere between 12 to 15 Ontario post-secondary institutions on board, and for that to reflect the diversity of the institutions that are there. We would like to see some Indigenous institutes included in that, some smaller universities and colleges, as well as some of the ones that are much larger. And we also plan to offer a supplemental stream of funding through ONCAT directly to institutions for them to support the kind of IT or registrarial infrastructure components that are needed to operationalize and get on board with this onboarding. So we're very proud of that. We're gonna, you're hearing about this, I think, literally probably just weeks after we've shared the news. And I hope, that we will have an opportunity in future jams for my colleagues at ONCAT to come and share what we found in terms of how successful our approach has been. And we're also hoping that, with Ontario doing this, that it sparks interest for other jurisdictions to take up the same. And always, as I've said to my colleagues, very happy to discuss with our other CAT siblings or other institutions our approach on sort of a massive expansion of digital transcript exchange and MyCredits in Ontario. Those are, I think, some of the things that we've done in the more recent time, and I'm sure at the end at the Q&A session we may be able to share more. But I will now pass it on to my colleague Christine Johns, who is also our PCCAT chair and also representing the University of Calgary.
Thank you so much, Yvette. I'm very pleased to be here today. So during this session, we've heard examples of key activities, shared best practices, and joint projects that are enabled by national collaborations in the areas of admissions and transfer. The Pan-Canadian Consortium on Admission and Transfer, or PCCAT, fosters these collaborations and facilitates the implementation of policies and practices that support student mobility and improve access to post-secondary education across Canada. Through projects like ARUC's national network and the resulting MyCredits that Yvette spoke about, we can demonstrate the transformative power of collaboration and the positive efforts when partnering organizations work together to achieve a collective outcome. This principle has been the foundation of the work of PCCAT and has really driven not just the activities that we undertake, but also the planning and structural work that we have been doing since 2018. The PCCAT 2021-23 strategic plan was really developed through consultation with members and guides the growth of the consortium over the next 3 years. And so the focus on delivering value to its members, the plan has 3 pillars and calls for PCCAT to prioritize research, knowledge sharing, and communications. And the collaborations with national and provincial organizations is critical to achieving all of this. PCCAT has and continues to work with our partners to engage in research and to facilitate access to related credit transfer and student mobility research that's being done in jurisdictions throughout Canada and beyond. The plan calls for this work to be expanded into identifying, analyzing, and synthesizing trends and conducting and leading our own research. PCCAT also works to develop and share effective practices and disseminate information to inform planning and advance effective student mobility and transfer practices. Our Learning Day in spring 2021 and our upcoming conference in June 2022 are examples of this work. This strategic plan calls for this work to be expanded further and to showcase innovative articulation agreements and learner pathways and share information on existing databases of transfer agreements in Canada. Equally as important, PCCAT works collaboratively to ensure stakeholders have access to transfer and student mobility related information. Some of that communication happens through avenues like this, but PCCAT is also undertaking major overhaul of its website to better engage and communicate with you. The strategic plan lays out some ambitious initiatives for PCCAT under each of these pillars, but we take comfort in knowing that it was developed based on what our stakeholders and members really identified as areas of need in the national conversation on admissions and transfer. It was recognized early that as an organization, PCCAT was not structured in a way to effectively enable all the work that needed to be done. And at the 2019 AGM, the PCCAT membership participated in a strategic planning session on the future of our organization. One of the recommendations coming out of this session was a proposed change to our membership structure, moving away from individual-only memberships to an institutional and organizational-based membership model. Due to COVID-19, the proposed changes were put on hold in 2020, but were brought forward and approved at the 2021 AGM earlier this summer. So over the next year, PCCAT is going to be working with its members and its stakeholders through this transition. Although individuals will still have the ability to join and contribute to the work of PCCAT, this new membership structure will improve equity across institutions, with the number of designated representatives being determined by an institution's operating budget, but only one vote per institution. Transfer organization membership will also exist, ensuring that our not-for-profit organizations and government agencies like PCCAT, who have jurisdictional responsibility for post-secondary transfer, have their necessary voices at the table. This membership structure is also going to reshape the composition of the PCCAT board. The goal of this organization and governance renewal really is to help advance PCCAT's work in facilitating the implementation of policies and practices that support student mobility across Canada. And most importantly, it's going to enable more collaborative initiatives like the ones we've heard about today. The COVID-19 pandemic has had an unprecedented impact on the post-secondary system and has dramatically challenged our institutions. It has also provided a unique opportunity, though, to innovate, to transform, and to collaborate. At PCCAT, we really want to hear from you. How has this pandemic impacted your needs for national collaborations like the ones we've heard about today? What would you like to see happen in the next 5 years to help build a more connected national system of transfer in Canada? We're now happy to open the discussion into the live session and hear your thoughts of these topics and beyond.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that overview of what's going on across the country. It is now my pleasure to welcome our panelists. We have Yvette from ONCAT, Rob Fleming from BCCAT. We have Christine Johns, who is the PCCAT chair. And you may notice that Anne-Marie looks a little bit different. It's my pleasure to welcome Eric Dowie, who is from the ACAT Secretariat. Welcome, everybody. We have a few questions for you, and just a reminder to the audience, please feel free to put your questions into the chat or the Q&A. My first question is, how has the pandemic impacted the need for national collaboration? I'm going to start with you, Yvette.
Thanks for that. Certainly, it has had a great impact on that. And we saw that right from the get-go, and I was very, very pleased to have colleagues from across Canada. We saw, particularly around transfer and student mobility, a real kind of scramble at the beginning to come up with various kind of policies or practices, often intended to support flexibility and be more student friendly, but not always was there a consideration of the impact on students, particularly transfer students or mobile students. And so the ability to talk across the country to other universities and colleges, other CAT systems, and get a sense of what was happening around policies and practices, and then take that back to our own institutions and our own governments was actually very helpful.
And what about from your perspective in Alberta? I'll start with you, Eric, and then we'll go on to Christine.
Well, I would say, really anything that affects institutions universally across the country, the pandemic is a pandemic. So it impacted every institution, size and scope, jurisdiction. So the experiences wouldn't be identical across the country, but certainly somewhat common. So any experiences and approaches institutions took to mitigate issues they were faced with, I think that sharing across the country, I mean, the collaboration, the shared experiences, the shared approaches, how the things can be addressed best practices, whatever the case may be, that national sharing can only help the student experience no matter where a student is taking their learning.
What about from over in Calgary for you, Christine?
And I would agree with what Yvette and Eric has said. And from a PCCAT perspective, I think we've seen over the last couple of years from our membership a draw in people wanting to make those connections. So wanting to reach out, whether it's through the CATs or across provinces or across institutions, to those who are working in that space of admissions and transfer, and wanting to connect about best practices and what's happening at their institutions. And COVID really just accelerated that. And for the reasons that Eric has mentioned, and that desire to connect with one another, find out what's happening and be able to pivot really quickly. And I think that that's been a really key aspect and something that'll be a takeaway for all of us in terms of where we go next and the learnings from this and how we're able to maintain those connections that have really been built over this last year and a half.
And what about for you, Rob, here in our own backyard in British Columbia?
Oh, sure. I mean, I'll piggyback and say it's much the same, but in very specific areas, I think the credit transfer discussion has benefited from national dialogue. With respect to course grading or non-credit credit courses, when those sort of flexibilities were being brought in to recognize the challenges for students during the pandemic, there really needed to be dialogue not only within institutions, but across institutions, so that students, when they show up with their transcripts for assessment for admissions elsewhere, are getting treated fairly. So we are front and center and working with Alberta and Ontario in particular to make sure we're sharing our collation of practices so that that can get back to the institutions. And the registrar groups are also very actively engaged in that conversation. And as I've said before, having that record, not only for this past year, but for years to come, will be really important for students to continue to be treated fairly.
I want to go back to you, Christine, for a minute. You're the chair of PCCAT, and I wonder if you might want to tell us what you would like to see happen in the next 5 years to help build a more connected national system of transfer.
We've thought a lot about that, and I think it really starts on building off projects that have already been initiated, and how do we leverage those projects that are happening between jurisdictions, between provinces, and between the various councils on admission and transfer, their equivalents across the country. And so when we can build off kind of those grassroots initiatives or those smaller projects that are happening, say, across provincial jurisdictions now and expand it to a national level, I think that's where our leverage is. And so building off those, and I think we see those as our role at PCCAT, is to make those connections and to accelerate those partnerships and those relationships at a national level and bring awareness to them. So those who might not be connected into those projects yet have an opportunity to develop those relationships and build on that as we move forward.
What about you, Yvette? I mean, what would you like to see happen in the next 5 years to help build out the national system of transfer?
I think that we recognize, I mean, I'll start with Ontario. We recognize that transfer looks differently, in each institution. And then, of course, transfer looks differently across different jurisdictions. So I think the ability to share those discoveries, those learnings, the data, particularly around student outcomes as it relates to transfer, I think would be very valuable. We all look at different data points. It would be nice to see some agreement across the country on key data points and be able to share that and look at practices that work.
I'm going to ask you a question, Eric. In one of the in the overview that was provided by Anne Marie, she talked about how the province of Saskatchewan has now onboarded and adopted Alberta technology. So you are now actually not just the Alberta representing Alberta institutions, but have a large constituency of Saskatchewan institutions. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how that went and how that's going.
Well, it's going very well, and certainly it's conversations that we've had probably dating back as early as 2010, 2011. We had when SaskCat was still a cat amongst the cats. And certainly we never let those conversations drop off the radar, and it was the persistence of Saskatchewan and the leadership there that really helped bring it across the line. But we're excited to have those Saskatchewan institutions within the system. It really represents the proximate relationship of transfer. Certainly we've had ongoing conversations with PCCAT too about the interoperability of our systems. So if we look at the future, if we arrive at something between our two systems, given Alberta's relationship with Saskatchewan, if we have really good interoperability between Alberta and BC, that essentially is good operability between Saskatchewan and BC. And then given BC's relationships with Manitoba and Ontario, as we grow these systems and we connect these systems, I think naturally, evolutionarily, the national system will come together.
I agree with you on that point, Eric. You know, it's one of those things that I've often said that it doesn't really matter if provinces are using a different platform, as long as those platforms can communicate with each other. In Ontario, Yvette, we're in discussions right now about doing our due diligence to try and collaborate. I wonder if you want to just talk a little bit about how that's going. I know you mentioned it in your presentation, but do you have anything further you want to update on us on those discussions?
I think for us, the real draw is, and why we were particularly attracted to the BC tool in the system, was really the robust level of data around course equivalencies. Also, the ability for the system to be able to work for us in order to be able to do some more live capture so that we can sort of have a good bird's eye view of where the requests are coming for course equivalency assessments, where there might be some backlogs, where there's, where there might be yeses and nos. Right now, we don't have that. Right now, the current system that we have, we call it kind of version 1.0. It's all sort of, hidden from our view. And for us to be able to do our work as a stewardship organization, it would be good to have that level of analysis. And I think, of course, to build on the equivalencies and the way that your systems also work with Alberta and now Saskatchewan. So we're, really drawn to that.
I do have one final question, actually, or something for you, Eric. You and I have had some discussions about having a joint meeting between BC TCS users as well as Alberta TCS users, and that is actually starting to come into reality. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, we've had discussions about having the Alberta contact persons, as we refer to them, who are really the individuals at institutions who manage the actual data on a day-to-day basis for the transfer system in Alberta. And to have that connection with BC, certainly already Alberta and BC share institutions in each other's systems. To have further conversations with broader users, we think only makes sense. Right now, we have College of the Rockies, Thompson Rivers Open Learning. They're part of both systems. Athabasca University from Alberta is part of the BC system. So to broaden those conversations amongst all our front-end users can only help build the relationships. And really a lot of what we see transfer around, it's about relationships as much as anything else. And to strengthen the conversations, not just at the CAT level, but at the operational level, we think can only increase the level of student mobility, or at least the documentation of the transfer pathways that are available.
Yeah, and certainly you and I have had a little bit of feedback there. You and I have had a number of conversations, and it always strikes me how similar the issues that you deal with and that we deal with here in British Columbia and that are dealt with across the country, they're all the same. And so I think that we have a lot to learn from each other when it comes to just knowing, well, how does the University of Alberta handle this situation? How does UBC or UVic handle it? I think that there's a lot to learn. And so for those users out there, we are going to be looking to have that meeting sometime in February in the new year, and we'll be sending out information about that. I do want to draw this session to a close. I just want to thank all of you for your time today, as well as during the pre-recording. I think this was a very valuable conversation. And to the audience out there, I will simply say that we're going to take a quick 5-minute breather, and you will want to come back at 3 o'clock, where we will be announcing our contest winners, as well as offering some final reflections for this year's Jam. See you then.